We're exposed more and more to contemporary art and the history of art, and folk art is catching up. People working in the two worlds are trying to cross-pollinate ideas, and that's what makes living with folk art so exciting. I think it's important to embrace how all of our ideas about folk art and the way we live is changing.
When we're talking about bold, this is what I think of. It is very moving to see them take the clay and employ so many artists to do what they do. The tradition of Talavera stems from Chinese pottery making, and it was gifted to Mexico by immigrants from Arab nations and then Mexico's own ceramic culture. It's this beautiful blend of history. It really shows how one piece of art ties together the universe.
I was extremely inspired by this application from New Zealand, embracing the Maori tradition of feathers and knit and creating these amazing sculptural shawls. Because I think the dimension of feathers is so seductive and exciting, and it reveals a lot of passion in the tradition itself. And we've never had anything like it, and I think they have a lot of fashion appeal. But this couple is taking a Maori tradition into today's language.
Traditionally, these were puberty dolls carved from balsa wood, adorned with bark cloth, and the artist has drawn upon that tradition and created these fantastic warrior and animal figures. We haven't had Takunya work represented in the market, so it's exciting to have a new voice. And I always enjoy seeing the ways that artists take a tradition that's very specific to a particular ceremony or cultural context, and then the ways in which they transform or innovate to create something that's new and can be brought to market. It's a wonderful painting tradition. So you have Calcutta as the capital of the colonial government, and artists who had traditionally been painting images of gods and goddesses to sell to pilgrims who would come to the Kali temple. And then artists also started to move out of the purely sacred subject matter and introduce social commentary into their work. So you get these jocular depictions of the Bengali bourgeoisie who are working for the British, sort of poking fun at the social structure that was emerging. So this year we have two artists from that tradition. We haven't had that in the market before, which is really exciting. We have a very renowned established artist, Kalam Patwa, also working in the Kaligat tradition. Their work is from a tradition that's identifiable, but when you look at Busker's work and you look at Kalam's, they're quite individual and quite unique. I love that with these two artists, we're getting multiple voices. It also, I think, shows us the diversity of tradition. Sometimes we think of tradition as being singular or monolithic, but in these artists' work, we see very different perspectives and also the many different styles that can be accommodated within a tradition.
He restored carpets. That was his profession. And one day, an older man came up to him and said, think about giving these carpets some new life. And he looked at the korak, which is patchwork, and he started what he calls an insane craft.
What got me excited was the idea of the upcycling of carpets that had some wear on them, and there were sections that could still have good reuse value. So that combination of things is what excited me.
I get really excited about artists who are thoughtful about their use of natural resources. The fashion industry is one of the most polluting industries in the world, and yet we all love fashion. So how can we do that in a way that doesn't damage our fragile planet anymore? That's always something that I look for.
Mapa Mapa is a resin derived from the buds of the mapa tree, and the practice itself is threatened, susceptible to deforestation, climate change, and agricultural encroachment. By boiling the resin, it becomes smooth and elastic, and then the artist is able to stretch it by synchronized hand and mouth movements between two artists. That's actually what got me. And then it's father and son, and the surface of the resin creates this kind of magical sheen. It's very delectable.
Organic is an understatement for her materials, and her bags are an evolution of her Sami culture, using those distinctive patterns. They're gorgeous. What I really fell in love with are the seafaring blankets. I don't know, I just love her wool, so maybe I just want more of it. It's warm and it's really old world, so I think that everything about her makes me feel like I'm going way, way back.
Her art reflects her family's tradition working with clay, her Zapotec heritage, and a rescue of lost techniques used by her region's ancestors. She pursued an investigation into forgotten mineral slip recipes used in Oaxaca long ago. She recovered a palette of 81 slip colors. Enadina's work is so intentional in her detail, and it also reminds me of the storyteller sculptures that you find here in New Mexico. That's my favorite part.
In the traditional kintsugi, you would be taking a broken object and mending the breaks with a resin that has gold flakes, but she takes pieces from one primary object and then creates a mosaic. The way that she chooses pieces to include creates this dialogue between the different elements. It's gorgeous, and particularly during this pandemic where we've seen so much breakage, there's something really beautiful about this artwork based around creating a new and artistic whole.
Baskets have become more and more important, and this year I'm really inspired because these baskets are very simple, and that's very rare that we have plain monocolored baskets that have a beautiful quality of weaving, and these happen to be more open weave, so they're not like what we've seen in the market before, and they look incredibly beautifully crafted, but they're very different from the kinds of baskets that we've had in the past. These have a certain new honesty that is very appealing and very directional going forward.
We've been discussing the idea of folk minimalism, artists using a small range of materials and highlighting natural colors. And a great example of this is Mawo. Their woven bags are really beautiful. Their palette shines, and the Wichi practice of weaving involves the use of thorny bromeliads that are found in their local forests. Mawo is really dedicated to the enhancement and advancement of the ancestral art of the Wichi tribe, offering financial empowerment and support for the women who make up the vast majority of their weavers, helping those in vulnerable rural communities.
This woman's cooperative, when it's a man's art, this was very daring to say, no, we want to weave too. We don't want to just wash and card the wool.
Reading her application, I was tearing up because you got the sense that she absolutely decided this was changing her life.
In her community, painting is traditionally a men's art form, but she created these really innovative styles of painting. This combination of bird's eye aerial views and then ant's eye views from the ground looking up. I really loved that, particularly because so often looking at Western paintings, you see this flat plane, and she completely upends that and instead gives you this multiplicity of perspectives. And in the time since she began, her whole community has taken up painting. So now her hometown is full of galleries and artist studios.
Leticia has really stepped forward to take over the role that her mother, the famed Josefina Aguilar, had had. Her mother's been losing her eyesight. The family collects clay from an earthen bank that they own, prepare it as a family, and much in the same manner that they're drawing the physical earth, they're also drawing inspiration from the people that they see in their community. And while some of their pieces do reflect older stories, what I particularly like are the pieces that captured people in a particular pose that evokes for you what the broader scene might look like. There's a sly humor in recognizing what drives their modern village.
Mitla painting was something women would do on the walls of their homes. The traditional compositions were done for the nuptial chamber. And there was an initiative in India to encourage women to move on to paper as an income generation project. So Mitla painting has been a robust tradition for women. And she's a single woman working in a patriarchal society. And painting has allowed her financial independence when she started to train other women. She also has social commentary as well as some compositions that reflect her experience of the COVID pandemic.
Mothers begin teaching their daughters at the age of 5, and they start with a ritual in honor of the spider's natural weaving prowess. Later, they are taken to the river where the older women pray that the water takes away those aspects that could negatively affect their craft. The ones that really attract me are these very large, what they call a fish basket, which reflects both the design as well as the use. And the shapes are so clean, but at the same time very pleasing, like something you might see in a museum. And yet it comes from local fibers, and it's an amazingly sophisticated piece of art. Watching the selection of placement committees is akin to attending a master class, but then there's this extra magic when you see members of the committee buzz a little bit more. And these hand-sewn pieces elicited just that reaction. The application included a pocket blanket, which is a form that's been disappearing. There's always the fear that something's going to die out or get lost. And to see it revived with this very young woman who's leading the community was akin to opening presents on a special day, and it had just that feel when we heard their gasps of surprise.
It shows how much fun folk art can be. It does bring back the joy that sometimes people forget about.
This is something from that community, bringing it to share with us and inviting us in. And that's exciting, that objects have cultural relevance and community relevance.
Returning to what is it about their roots that feels like home.
There was a tradition of papier-mâché figures that were used in festivals where they actually had fireworks built into them and they would blow them up. So his grandfather, Pedro Linares, was working in that tradition, and he had a dream about these monster figures that he named alebrijes that he started making in papier-mâché. So he's been gone quite a long time now, but his grandson, Ricardo Linares, is still working in the same studio in Mexico City. I was very happy to see somebody in that tradition apply to the market. He is also coming out of a related tradition in that a lot of those papier-mâché figures for festivals, there would be a framework inside them made out of bent carrizo, bamboo, or some other kind of reeds. So he's taken that tradition and he has some figures like that, just the bare structure without the papier-mâché. But he's also made all kinds of trucks and cars and airplanes and things like that using that same structure. Just a lot of fun, but also really beautiful art at the same time.
I thought the process with the polishing of the raw clay is just fascinating, and so much like the Native American pottery that we see here in Santa Fe. And his colors, he gets really beautiful, quiet colors. It just had a lot of tactile quality. And I do love the cat figures. They almost have human faces, their little noses, definitely from a cat lover. And my family collected work like that when I was little, so when I saw that, it really resonated with me.
It's a tradition I've seen for years in Mexico, a very fine lacquerware. You often just see it on fairly simple objects like gourd bowls, but there's a whole tradition of making toys, and this man is really the master of that. And it's a lot of fun. They're exquisitely made, highly polished. The technique they use is many layers of lacquer that get sanded and smoothed and polished. But there are Ferris wheels and carousels and trains and airplanes and cars. And it's good because it captures the spirit of fun in Mexican folk art.
That's one of my favorites because I inherited boots with that technique from about 1920. And it's fun to see the 21st century version of the same work. And it's very similar. So I can't wait to see the difference between 100 years. I can't believe that the work now in the 21st century is so close to what they did in the early 20th. For them to revive this, that's going to be exciting to see at the market. The other historical perspective is the metal weaving on cotton. It's difficult because you can get a twist in that metal so easily, and the drapability of it is almost like a liquid.
I saw how serious they were about reviving this tradition that had fallen out of favor because of a cheapening of the process by using polyester. You see this careful attention to the historic process, and it was popular for flappers, this jazz age elegance to the cloth.
So many talk about the community pride of the artwork that they do and the identity that comes from these traditions. And sometimes young people want to get away from that, but it is very encouraging to see people say, no, this is where I belong and this is what I want to make sure continues to happen.
He's working with over 300 people in his community to produce these really beautifully composed tie and dye bandani textiles. And it's wonderful to see how different his style is from our returning market favorites, to see these artists working in a tradition from the same community but presenting very different kinds of work. So it does show us the depth of these traditions.
But what I think is interesting is he's also dyeing in color field abstractions that remind me a lot of Mark Rothko's work. They have that beautiful, peaceful quality of geometry set in the landscape, which is the scarf itself.
Rebosos are such a central part of indigenous Mexico, and rebozo making has become a bit of an endangered species. And to find this young man who's only 24, who felt the same way, grew up in a rebozo making family, and felt the need to start an academy to try to interest young people in continuing the traditions was astounding and very hopeful for the future.
The first time I saw work like this from a distance, I thought it was ceramic. And when I saw that it was a basket, I was just blown away that they got such detail and sharp geometric patterns. And the colors are out of this world. They're natural dyes, but they're so vibrant. I love the orange and black. Traditionally, the women were the weavers, and now it is something that the men work on too. And the children are taught at a very young age. Definitely a communal art.
Rodgers produces these beautifully colorful, fine textiles that are like modernist works of art. His weaving is complicated, often adorned with geometric patterns. It stands apart from the more traditional weaving that you find in the same region, and still includes these very traditional Indian motifs, and is innovative in that sense. Rodgers describes the network of farmers, vendors, tradespeople, and artisans who contribute to the Vankar weaving tradition as an ecology of collaborative effort.
The method they use involves plaiting silver threads in the style of balanchera braids worn by Afro-Colombian women to honor the beauty of Black people. This is a tradition that is in danger of dying out due to the ongoing involvement of armed groups in the gold trade. Daisy's father was actually killed when she was only 2 years old. What I've loved about getting to know this group and mentorship they're doing within their own communities is incredibly inspiring. And to note that the opportunity they're being provided was birthed out of such a scary thing, but it's given them so much hope.
Within the Misak community, the spiral represents the circle of life. Birth is at the center, and you grow outwards towards death and beyond. They also talk about using weaving as a method of preserving ancestral knowledge and ensuring the ongoing artistic sovereignty of their community so that generations to come can continue to learn about what these symbols mean and partake in them. And I think it's incredibly beautiful and generous that they're willing to share some of it with us.